Every takeoff leaves a trace, not just in the sky, but on the planet below.
It's very easy for air travel to overwhelm your greenhouse gas emissions on a personal level.
Coming up, a fight over airport expansion in London, where promises of economic growth
there is absolutely job creation, about 14,000 jobs,
collide with concerns about the cost to people and the planet.
That's an extra 100,000 flights a year flying over communities which are not normally affected largely by noise.
And as the world agrees on new rules to protect the oceans, we ask a simple question: can global ambition move faster than global impact?
Now, countries who are parties to the treaty are bound by it.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now, do you get the sense that the powers that be care about the environment and the communities around Gatwick?
They are after one thing only, and that is profit for their shareholders.
And I'm happy, nothing's going to stop me. I'm making my way home, I'm making my way.
We could be lovers, chasing each other under diamond skies.
This is London's Gatwick, one of Europe's 10 busiest airports. In the first half of 2025, Gatwick reported around $670 million in revenue, growth driven by rising passenger numbers and higher airport charges. The airport regularly serves over 40 million travelers a year and connects people to more than 200 destinations around the world. We don't have a single publicly reported figure for Gatwick's total carbon footprint. The airport says its signed industry pledges aim for net zero emissions by the year 2030, which is an accelerated goal from earlier 2050 ambitions. Gatwick also holds a Level 4 Plus airport carbon accreditation, a recognized international certification for carbon management within the airport industry. But it's also at the center of one of the most controversial aviation expansion plans in the UK right now, because it sits at the crossroads of economic growth and climate commitments. The airport wants to convert its current emergency runway into a fully operational second runway, a move that would significantly increase capacity. In practical terms, that expansion is projected to mean more than 100,000 additional flights a year by the late 2030s. So before we dig into why this project has sparked such strong opposition, let's break down some of the climate cost of flying itself, starting with what happens during a single takeoff. That moment a plane leaves the runway, feels like freedom. But the roar you hear during takeoff is fuel being burned at the fastest rate of the entire journey. A modern passenger jet burns the most fuel in the first few minutes when it's at its heaviest, full of passengers, luggage, cargo and fuel. To put that into perspective, a large long-haul aircraft like a wide-body jet can burn several tons of fuel just getting airborne. And for every ton of jet fuel burned, just over 3 tons of carbon dioxide go into the atmosphere. Now compare that to life on the ground. An average 3-person household in Europe, for instance, produces a few tons of CO2 over an entire year, mostly from heating, electricity, transport. One takeoff can rival months of household emissions, sometimes more, depending on the aircraft.
And if you think about it, how much do you drive and how much do you fly? You fly longer distances. So it's very easy for air travel to overwhelm your greenhouse gas emissions on a personal level.
And the size of the aircraft matters. A small jet burns far less fuel than a wide-body plane that's built to cross oceans. Bigger planes, more engines, more thrust, more emissions, especially at takeoff. And this might surprise you. A half-empty flight does not emit half the carbon. That's because most of a plane's weight isn't the passengers, but the aircraft itself. So even with empty seats, the engines still have to lift tens of tons, including the fuselage, wings, and most of the fuel.
The aviation industry accounts for approximately 3% of the world's emissions.
And carbon dioxide isn't the whole story. Scientists have found that aviation also warms the planet through nitrogen oxides and cloud effects created at cruising altitude. impacts that add to aviation's climate footprint.
We often talk about the hidden side of aviation's climate impact is all the other emissions, and most notably are the contrails, the white lines in the sky. They may seem beautiful, but actually they are very, very bad for the environment, and that we can say that up to doubles the aviation's climate impact. So we're actually talking about kind of nearly 5% of kind of global warming is aviation induced.
So when airports talk about adding runways or increasing the number of flights, they're not just adding convenience, they're locking in thousands more takeoffs, with each one leaving a climate cost that lasts far longer than the flight itself.
We're talking 1% of people cause 50% of aviation's climate impact. And those are the corporate travelers, the private jet flyers, the frequent flyers. So already, that family that takes that one flight a year to go and visit their family, that is not the problem. That is not aviation's climate problem.
So if a single takeoff already carries a significant climate cost, the next question is, what happens when you plan for thousands more?
The expansion of Gatwick, interestingly, isn't actually an expansion like Heathrow is going to be undertaking. It's simply moving the runway, so it's utilizing existing infrastructure. What's important about this is there is absolutely job creation, about 14,000 jobs. There's going to be expansion of passenger traffic, of cargo, which is vital. But what's really important about this, Reagan, is that it's not new engineering of infrastructure on old design. This is an opportunity on private investment to accelerate sustainable aviation's importation into airport infrastructure. And that's a really good thing. So it's really a matter of saying this is a project that's going to push the benefits of sustainable aviation much, much farther into the future for our opportunity as citizens and as an economy, rather than having to wait for government funding to do that.
How are UK locals and travellers reacting to the project?
This is a good thing because, importantly, when we look at Gatwick and Heathrow even, they've maxed out on capacity. And so when there's a maxing on capacity, there's a limitation in number of flights and costs naturally go up. So by expanding the airport, we're increasing significantly the capacity for travelers and cargo, which means you and I can travel much more quickly as we want to and much more cost affordably. That's a good thing. When it comes to cargo, it's really about the opportunity cost. What if we don't do this? Because cargo is vital to the UK economy. And as again, we're maxed out on capacity, if we don't expand Gatwick, we lose the enormous opportunity for competitiveness of not only Gatwick, but the UK as an economy. And we all know right now how incredibly competitive economies are, especially as trading partnerships are shifting.
But there's been stiff opposition to Gatwick's second runway plans. Environmental groups took the British government to court in mid-January, challenging the approval. They say they're profoundly concerned about the potential climate impacts, including more flights, more noise, and additional wastewater. One of those groups, Communities Against Gatwick Noise Emissions, rang us up to tell us why they're fighting the expansion.
The main reasons why we feel that the airport expansion is inappropriate is the increased air traffic across quiet, open countryside. That's an extra 100,000 flights a year, flying over communities which are not normally affected largely by noise. It's the increase in the surface traffic, because the local railway lines are already at capacity, that the additional passengers, regardless of the conditions in the permission, are going to travel to the airport over the roads, either by taxi or by car. So we're going to need additional parking. There's going to be all the extra traffic. The local roads are full already. We have an M25 and an M23, which are pretty much at capacity. And if there's anything that goes wrong, it all diverts onto the local roads. This extra traffic is going to cause wear and tear to the highways, which the local authorities are going to have to pick the bills up for, which is unfair on the taxpayers who live nearby. And it's going to create a huge amount of additional air pollution. And the proposal includes a freight traffic. And the freight is all going to have to get to and from the airport by road. And that is going to create extra congestion, extra air pollution. So that's a real concern. The other concern that we've raised is that, 28 extra million passengers every year, they're all going to go to be very blunt, want to go to the toilet before they get on the plane. Every single flush of a toilet, where is that wastewater going to go? So they hadn't even considered that aspect in the planning application.
So as I understand it, the key point in Cagney's legal claim is the failure to account for inbound flight emissions and non-CO2 impacts. Why is that important for understanding the true climate cost of expanding Gatwick?
We don't think any weight has been given to the issue of fine particulates. So when aircraft fuel is burnt, it creates a range of pollutants. The same sorts of pollutants that are produced when you burn diesel fuels, but it also produces more fine particulates. There's no scientific evidence of the harm that that's going to do to people over a long period of time, or insufficient evidence. The evidence that's there already is that fine particulates are an issue.
Cagney also argues that the planning decision is not only environmentally flawed, but procedurally irrational. Can you explain what procedurally irrational means in this context?
So the decision was made without taking into consideration all those aspects that they haven't considered, like the wastewater, like the non-CO2 impacts, like the noise impacts. So the decision was not based on all the environmental considerations that should have been undertaken at the time of determining the application. It was almost as though the government had decided that it was going to give approval regardless of all those considerations, which we think is a mistake in terms of the procedure, that they should have considered every single aspect. The examination, the public inquiry, considered all those aspects in a huge amount of detail, particularly things like highways and Network Rail. They all gave their opinion as to how the increase in traffic would negatively impact both of those, and yet those were not included in the final decision. So we think it's sort of, the basic fundamentals was the decision was made for to show that there's growth at any cost, and we think the cost is far too great.
Are there alternatives to runway expansion that Cagney believes the government or the aviation industry should be focusing on?
So one of the things that Cagney have been supporting is a pledge to fly less, that actually don't want to stop flying, as I've said before, that it's everyone's right to have an overseas holiday, and for business people to do business trips. But there is less need for that. COVID showed us that virtual meetings are perfectly acceptable, that you can sign documents legally online. So there are other ways to do business than face-to-face in another country. And in terms of the holiday traffic, one of the reasons why we feel that the second runway is probably not needed is that economically what it's doing is it's taking the British pound in the holiday makers to countries elsewhere. Whilst it's great for the economies in Europe to have British tourists, actually our economy needs English tourists in England. So, that's one alternative, is to promote sustainable holiday taking in this country. We've got lots to offer. That's a way forward. So the pledge to fly less is one method. Another strategy is to ensure that people, when they book their holidays or their flights, they have the environmental information as to how much carbon dioxide that flight is producing, so they can make an informed decision. Do they really need to fly? Can they find an alternative form of transport? And it would be good to see the government supporting subsidised rail fares to make rail journeys across the country competitive with, say, flying to Scotland or Northern Ireland.
Another of the claimants, the Gatwick Area Conservation Campaign, spoke to us about how the court case against the project went.
It's not an easy thing to describe. A court case is a fairly tedious process. And unlike criminal cases where there's all sorts of facts come out and everybody gets very excited, it is bland and it relates back and forth to various legal references. And it's been best described as watching paint dry.
What were the legal arguments both for and against the expansion?
Well, we challenged the way that the Secretary of State had interpreted aviation policies, and these particularly relate to items like climate change and the carbon emissions, and in addition to that, to how they have interpreted the regulations about noise and to accommodate mitigation features of noise, whether they'd done it in the right way. And those were really the two principal challenges on environmental grounds. And then that we made challenges on the need aspect and the business case. And we feel a very strong case challenging their figures on the expected business growth that would fund the future profits of the operation. And this is a slightly different case in some ways because the actual funding to build the expansion is coming from the owners and their investors, whereas it's not a government body that's going to invest and make the money. But the whole purpose of doing it, obviously to make money for the shareholders, but is also to benefit the UK PLC. And we showed that the figures that they're giving don't add up in our books. But in addition to that, because it's big global corporations, they are after one thing only, and that is profit for their shareholders. And consideration of serious community and environmental impacts have gone out the window. And I reckon we started noticing that probably about 20 years ago, significantly. So I transferred my loyalties. I mean, I like aeroplanes, and one of our basic policies is we are not against Gatwick as it stands. Our argument is Gatwick's big enough as it stands. It doesn't need to expand.
So what are your best and worst case scenarios out of this case?
If the judge makes a decision in our favour, obviously we'll be delighted, but we can be assured that certainly the Gatwick Airport will follow what route they can to challenge that and appeal. And in addition, the Secretary of State may well decide to appeal because government policy at the moment is to support growth as much as possible, irrespective of what damage it seems to do. That seems to be a policy we're seeing coming out of the current government. If we lose, then we'll be analysing very carefully the grounds on which the judge has said that we've lost, and we will be looking seriously at an appeal. Of course, all of that costs money, so we're very, very busy fundraising continually.
Do you get the sense that the powers that be care about the environment and the communities around Gatwick?
I think that the government, in principle, is concerned about the environment, and in principle, on a lower level, on a more local level, local authorities are very concerned about ecology and generally about the environment around us. But when it comes to big business putting pressure on, it goes out the window. It's very easy to notice how that happens. Less so at the local authority level. Local authorities now seem to be waking up to the need to acknowledge local impacts, environmental impacts, not just impacts on people, but impacts on the local environment, on the woodland, on the water particularly, and sewage are becoming very, very popular topics for discussion. And you're probably well aware that the water companies in the UK are under close scrutiny and suspicion of their financial capabilities.
Coral reefs. It's easy to think of them as rocks or something fixed and lifeless, but coral reefs are alive. Each reef is built by billions of tiny, soft-bodied creatures called polyps, which are related to jellyfish, that live together in vast numbers. Each polyp builds a hard skeleton made of calcium carbonate, and over time, decades, centuries, even millennia, those skeletons stack up, forming reefs, some of which we can see from space. Take the Great Barrier Reef, the largest living structure on Earth, or the reefs of the Caribbean Sea, which help protect island coastlines. Or the Red Sea, where corals survive in some of the planet's warmest waters. What makes coral reefs even more remarkable is a partnership happening inside each polyp, because living within their tissues are microscopic algae. The algae use sunlight to make food, and in return they feed the coral and give reefs their colour. It's a fragile balance. If the water gets too warm, coral becomes stressed and expel the algae. That's called bleaching.
What happens with coral bleaching is that this symbiosis, this relationship between the animal and the algae, becomes disrupted. So the algae no longer stays within the tissues of the coral, leaving it without its color, leaving it weaker and vulnerable because it doesn't receive the nutrients and the food sources that the algae provides for the coral.
The coral isn't dead, but it is starving. And if the heat lasts too long, it does not recover.
Znači dolazi do izbeljivanja, dolazi do smrtnosti polipa, tu dolazi isto tako do nekroze, direktne nekroze tkiva zbog visokih temperatura. Nažalost, tu I tamo uđe I smeće, pa recimo smeće zna oštetiti kolonije.
Coral reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, but supports around a quarter of all marine life, from tiny fish to sharks. They protect coastlines from storms and erosion, support fishing and tourism for hundreds of millions of people, and hold clues for new medicines. So when coral reefs disappear, it's the collapse of an entire system, built by some of the smallest animals on Earth, with some of the biggest consequences for our planet.
If we look at coral reefs or seagrass systems, what we know is that we have now currently really extremely damaging heat waves, marine heat waves in the ocean, and they induce mass mortality at the moment, currently today at 1.3 or 1.4 degrees warming.
And now new climate science suggests coral reefs have passed a critical threshold, one of the earliest planetary tipping points caused by global warming. If global temperatures stay high, these ecosystems as you know them will be lost, affecting hundreds of millions of people and a quarter of all marine life. But in January, a new global treaty came into force designed to better protect the world's oceans. We spoke to the World Wildlife Fund about what it could mean for marine ecosystems like coral reefs.
Yeah, this new treaty matters to everybody because it is about half of our planet, and it's the international waters, which actually belongs to all of us, you and me and everybody else, and all the children into the future, if you wish. It's all of ours right and responsibility. And the ocean is an incredibly important source of food. It's also an incredibly important regulator of the climate. And so in order to make sure that these services are here for us in the future, this treaty is very important.
And now that this is officially law, what would people actually see change first?
So the High Seas Treaty, as you said, it's just started, right? So it's just launched, it's just become international law. Now countries who are parties to the treaty are bound by it. And this means that they now need to collaborate to establish protected areas in places where there is a lot of life, or very important life, for the whole ocean or for an area of the ocean. They can, for example, they can create protective measures, protected areas and other measures around the migratory species of large whales, for example. And so people who like to think about that we have thriving whale populations in the ocean, they can then see these results. It is also important to know that in many areas there is overfishing, there's destructive fishing. Fisheries need to be better regulated in order to not impact on the ocean life in the areas where they fish, and this treaty can help that. Same goes for shipping. Shipping routes may have to be rerouted in places, or ships need to slow down, or other measures for shipping might need to be put in place so that ocean life that share the same areas can be protected.
And that's for sure. Aviation growth and ocean protection may seem worlds apart, but they're connected by the same reality. Our choices add up. Whether it's a new runway or a new global treaty, what happens next will decide what we lose, or we still have time to save. See you next time. Bye.
And I'm happy, nothing's going to stop me. I'm making my way. I'm making my way. I go so low, oh, I go so low. I'm making my way home. I'm making my way.